Big Joe, what is going on, man? It's great to see you.
What's up, brother? I'm really excited to see you too, and so grateful that you gave me this opportunity to come onto your platform, man. You have a great one, and I appreciate the opportunity, man.
Thanks, Joe. It seems like we just spoke recently.
I know, that's weird, right? Is that weird? I feel the same way.
That's right. It only feels like it's been 10 or 15 minutes since we've last spoken. So, okay, folks, so super excited to share with you guys this incredible leader, incredible man. So Joe Bogdan is the co-founder of the Llama Leadership. He has a podcast, the Llama Lounge, and it's a leadership podcast. He's an adjunct professor of leadership studies and is a chief master sergeant in the United States Air Force, which means big cheese for those who don't know Air Force ranks. He's an E-9 in the Air Force. He has led various organizations with diverse missions across multiple countries and currently oversees almost 500 people composed of U.S. military and civilian personnel in the Travis Air Force Base, California. And you've been in the Air Force for how long now, Joe?
19 years, man.
Oh, 19
Yep,
years.
yep.
Okay.
I'll be hitting 20 early next year. So it's been a great ride.
Amazing. Yeah. So super excited, man. Joe, he's also studied emotional intelligence and stuff. So he's one of the rare birds out there that have actually got training in this area. I'm a little jealous. Mine's all been self-learning journey myself, but super excited. In fact, we just did an interview on Joe's Llama Lounge podcast, which was a lot of fun. Joe, it's great to get to know you. So please tell us your story, Joe. How did you become Joe Bogdan?
All right. So the truncated version. I was born outside of Osan Air Base in Korea. I left Korea when I was an infant, so don't remember a lot about it from that first time. Moved over to the East Coast for a while, lived in New Jersey. My mother and my stepfather got a divorce pretty early at that point. Don't know my biological father. And then, so what happened at that point was we moved to New York City because it's just a little bit easier for an unskilled immigrant to be able to get a job. So my mom went there and she became a waitress, and I became what we call a latchkey child, which taught me a lot about being independent and kind of, taking care of myself. And grew up. Eventually, we moved out to Washington State, which is what I consider home, Tacoma, Seattle area. Huge Seahawks fan, go Hawks. Joined the Air Force when I was almost 19 years old because I realized that if I wanted to make something of myself, we couldn't afford school or anything like that. So I needed to go do something different. And also I realized that although I hung out with a lot of great people, I had some great family out there, but I also hung out with a lot of not so good people. and I saw like a future that wasn't going to probably be real good. I'm very fortunate. I felt that I had the foresight to think, okay, this is not going to be good, because fortunately I would say that I grew up and I was blessed with intelligence. But being intelligent and being around the wrong people sometimes can result in some very bad things happening. So got out of there and went to the recruiter and said, hey, get me out of here in like 2 weeks. I don't want time to think about it. I don't want, whatever, like just get me out of here. He said, I got this job called electrical power production and get you out of here in 2 weeks. I was like, sounds good. I don't even know what that is. He said, it's like a hybrid between a mechanic and an electrician. I said, cool. Sounds cool. I like working on cars. I like electricity. Let's go. Joined the Air Force. On 13 February 2001. So pretty much almost my entire career, minus 7 months of it was we're at war, in some way, some type of conflict. So it's been a great ride. I've been all over the world. I've been stationed in Germany, stationed multiple times in Asia, to include my where I was born. I was stationed at Osan 2 times. Spent a lot of time in Korea, Japan, traveled the entire world. It's been great. And one of the defining moments in my career was, because we're going to talk about emotional intelligence, was when I had the opportunity to work at the Airmen and Family Readiness Center as a career broadening opportunity, which for those that don't know what that is, it's kind of like a social service center on an installation. Every service has something like it, where we provide social services to the members and their families to deal with whatever might be coming in their lives. And we're a microcosm of society, and we have a lot of the same issues that we have outside the gates, and we need help too. So I got to work there, and I learned some things called like empathy. I learned, being an engineer, growing up in the engineer career field, that wasn't something that I needed, along the way up. So, but to be an effective leader is something that you definitely need, right? Technicians, maybe not so much, but so I learned empathy, public speaking, and being able to understand that it's not how I feel about somebody's situation. It's more like focusing on how they're feeling, right? So that you can help them. And that's where I kind of found my meaning and purpose in life. And that was really to help other people reach their maximum potential. And one of my mantras is that, I want to create world championship winning coaching trees. I want to teach leaders how to be effective leaders elsewhere. So if they're assistant coaches right now, and I'm blessed with being the head coach, I want them to be a great head coach somewhere else. So my job is to invest in them. So that's something that I kind of found as my meaning and purpose while working there. And while I worked at the Airman Family Writing Center, that's where I also kind of learned about emotional intelligence. The Air Force started taking that on. I got to go to University of Pennsylvania, get some resiliency training with the Army, with the soldiers out there, with the comprehensive soldier fitness, which was absolute blessing, life-changing for me. It taught me how to be a better airman, a better leader, but really a better person. And it taught me a lot about myself. Right now, I am in quarantine at Scott Air Force Base in Illinois, about to head down range to take care of the nation's business in a bit. So we're quarantined to make sure that we're clean before we go into other countries. And to take care of mission. And I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a great opportunity to me to broaden some of my leadership skills and hopefully bring some value to my teammates downrange. But that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
Joe, that is awesome, man. Thank you so much for sharing all that. What a tremendous career. And during our conversation when we first met, you had shared that one of your joys is serving. And I thought, man, what a neat philosophy, that servant leader concept. I feel is so important. So let me ask you this, Joe, how important is emotional health and emotional intelligence in leadership as here you are, a senior leader in the Air Force. How important is EQ?
Man, I think it's potentially the most important thing, right? Because you learn a lot of things coming up. You learn about your technical competence, you learn management skills. I'm not saying those aren't important. They're very important, right? You need to learn those things because you can create toxic environments by not being an effective manager on accident, right? But at some point you start transitioning and realizing that it's about the people, and you're no longer the doer. You're no longer the executor. You are now the facilitator. I call the point guard or the coach, right? You're transitioning from that player's coach to just a coach, right? And at that point, when you're in those key transition phases, understanding how your emotions impact your own effectiveness, as well as how your emotions impact your team and how your team's emotions impact you and each other. Those are things that are so vital. And I don't think that we talk about it enough. And, just not being able to effectively deal with your own emotions, just step one, awareness of that you have emotions for one, like some of us don't, we try to put them away and act like they don't exist. But understanding that, being able to really explore them, communicate them, and in many ways control them. And controls, it's a tough word to say. I would say more like, utilize them, make them effective for you instead of you just riding and participating in life and letting the emotions take you wherever they're going to take you. I think of it as like, hey, be the driver and not in the passenger side, passenger seat, while your emotions just kind of taking you wherever you go. You're able to influence and be more effective, whether it's mission related, home related, and everything in between, because there is no difference. There's no home, like my personal opinion, there's no work-life balance. It's harmony. And if you're able to be effective in one, you can be more effective in the other. So emotional intelligence is very important, and understanding that. And I think for us, especially in the military, we grew up in an environment where it's like, okay, the culture is like, hey, don't worry, be cyborgs. You don't need to really worry about it. And it's changing now. But when I grew up, when I was coming in, it wasn't cool to tell people that you have these emotions and you're dealing with stuff. Vulnerability was not cool. There was no Brene Brown back in 2001 talking about this stuff. We're kind of learning a lot of that now. And I think the earlier you figure it out, the more effective you'll be for you and your people, for sure.
Love that. That's great, Joe. And that's great to hear that, that there are a lot of, there are a number of organizations that are starting to figure this stuff out. There are still organizations that haven't figured it out either. Mm-hmm. I've talked to some of my law enforcement buddies, and if they go seek a counselor or therapist, it doesn't look good in that culture, because now they're questioning, well, are you fit for duty? And it's like, just imagine the number of emotion or the trauma that they see on a daily basis. Right. And then to not be able to have the tools or equipping on how to handle all that emotional trauma would be terrible. And then also, in the big army, I don't know that the big army has, and again, just from my little foxhole and talking to a lot of my buddies that are colonels and senior leaders and stuff, that it hasn't hit big army yet. Some of the special operations guys, it sounds like they're starting to get into, some of the emotional intelligence stuff and realize the direct impact that emotional intelligence and emotional health plays into the bottom line, into performance ultimately, of that organization, like you had alluded to. So let me ask you this, Joe. Can you give a good example and a bad example of, in leadership, of emotional intelligence, of how you have seen emotional intelligence play out, or a lack thereof, in your leadership journey, either personally or something that you have observed?
Yeah. So I've seen, when I think about it, effective versus ineffective leadership, when it comes to emotional intelligence, I think of it as like acceptance versus avoidance, right? And I've seen where leaders come in and they're so mission oriented that they're not worried about the quote unquote soft skills and the emotions and everything else that comes along with it. And what I've seen in that occasion is that people don't feel valued, right? They feel like they're just numbers. They feel like they're just tools. And that they might still be effective. They might be effective enough, but it doesn't help them reach their maximal potential, right? And that organization is now at a 6 when it could have been a 9, right? It might be a 4 when it could have been a 6, depending on whatever the organization's at, right? And so I see that happen a lot. I see leaders not allowing themselves to be vulnerable, and this is a timely, probably a timely thing here. I would say, leaders that don't have the humility to be able to show vulnerability and explain that, they have emotions too and all that, it leads to prolonged issues that are here. So let's say right now we have a lot of racial inequality issues and everything else, and across the services, we're trying to have these conversations. Well, if you're not willing to say, I don't know the answer to all your questions, and you're putting all of your eggs in the basket of you're the strong leader, that you always can control yourself, you're not willing to say, I don't have all the answers. So now you're not even willing to have those uncomfortable conversations. You avoid them versus having them. And your folks don't need you to have all the answers all the time. Sometimes they just need to be heard, right? To have those conversations. So I see that happen a lot. Now, what do I see when it's a positive? I see leaders that have that emotional intelligence understand how their emotions impact them, and whether it's transitioning from home life to work life and back and forth every day, whether that's how they influence their people, how they control their emotions at the right times and not just go off the handle about things. I see those leaders creating more of a family environment and an environment of trust where people feel like they can give and receive feedback, right? And if they have that trust, now they have more accountability. And if they have more accountability, they typically have more commitment. And if you can get to those points, your organization can go from, now it's like, maybe you really probably talent-wise was at a 7, but now somehow you're performing at a 9. Right? Because people are all working together. The math starts getting funny, right? The 1 + 1 no longer equals 2. 1 + 1 could equal 5, 6, 7, or 8 because of that. So I think it's very important for us to consider that and realize that, we as leaders need to set the environment. And if we set the environment of trust and our people feel like there's comfort there, and they feel like they're being not just used as resources, but invested in as assets, that's when you're going to get the most effective organizations and that family environment where people are going to go above and beyond. And emotional intelligence is a foundation for that, in my opinion.
Love that, Joe. I read a book a little while ago called The Culture Code.
Yeah.
And phenomenal book. And in there, so this guy studied some of the top, high performing teams in the world. And one of the things that he talks about in the Culture Code, which I'm going to reference to what you just shared, he talks about in all these top performing organizations, one of the threads of continuity among every single one of those high performing teams is safety and trust. And like what you just mentioned there, and like you said, I feel like, and I mentioned it even in your podcast when you were interviewing me, that I feel like the organization will reflect the emotional health and emotional intelligence of the leader. And if that leader is not safe and doesn't convey safety, does not, convey safety and convey trust in an organization, man, that will permeate throughout that organization, and that organization's performance will be impacted. How well does an organization perform that doesn't trust the leader or each other, or doesn't feel safe in that organization?
Yeah. I'll even go further. There is like, a friend of mine, retired Major General John Gronsky, once said that to me. And he was like, how many times have you trusted someone who didn't trust you? Right. And it's like, you're a leader and you expect your people to trust you, but you don't trust them enough to allow them to see your vulnerabilities. Right. You don't trust them enough to express that there are times where you have emotions, and these emotions might, that you need to have conversations about them and everything else. And you don't trust them enough to be able to be willing to receive feedback from them. How can you expect them to trust you? Right.
That's great. That's huge. Let's kind of do a little bit of a dissection. How does being vulnerable impact trust?
So in my opinion, I think being vulnerable, and I think there's a line to it, right? You got to be careful about, because like in my opinion, as a leader, you don't want to look like you're not confident anymore too, right? So sometimes when you're vulnerable, be vulnerable to the right people, because we all have to have that outlet. But I would say being vulnerable and showing people, right, that you're human too, will inspire versus just impress. Because too many of us are trying to impress people, and oftentimes goes the other way, right? It turns people off. And this is what I'll say is, like, I'm not a big fan of Superman. I think Superman's cool. I watched the show, the movies and stuff. I think it's cool, but I can't relate to Superman. I'm not Superman, right? I'm not. I relate to more like the superheroes that show vulnerability, like Spider-Man, right? Or, some of these guys that he shows, like, oh, they have self-doubt and all that stuff too, right? So if I'm just worried about impressing people, showing them all the good stuff all the time, and not vulnerable and showing them that that I also have failures, that I also have missteps, that I lose my cool every now and then, even though I'm trying to practice emotional intelligence and continuously grow, that will inspire trust, because it'll come from a place of authenticity, right? Because we're not infallible. None of us are, right? So in my opinion, I think that it inspires, and it also shows people that the authenticity that they want to see, right? People want to see that, because they want to see that they can be human as well. You give them permission to, right?
Yeah, that's a great way to say it. I love that. I had a leader that I was around for a number of years that was not vulnerable or transparent at all, and I had known him for a number of years, and I told him, I said, hey, look, just so you know, That's super fine. If you don't want to be vulnerable or don't be transparent, you want to be transparent. But I said here's where there's the self-awareness that's you got that comes into play here, and then also the social awareness that comes into play. He was not aware of the impact of never being transparent or vulnerable. He always had the guard up. And I said, man, some of us have known you for years, like a decade, but yet we all feel like strangers to you. So how tight, how close can that organization be when you're always walking around? I mean, imagine spending time with your friends and your family, and you're always have your gear on, your kit on. You got your helmet on, you got your body armor on, you got your weapons on. How close can you be? And again, I love that man, because we all feel feelings and emotions, but if you don't feel, which is part of the human experience, and if you as a team member do not feel safe around the leader to be human, right. I feel like there's gonna be a barrier up, a wall up all the time.
Yeah, and what else is it gonna do? Because if you're always walking around with a barrier, I haven't met that person that's real. That person's probably putting up a barrier, right? And that's exhausting. That's got to be exhausting, right? So now you're putting up a barrier and using I don't know, let's just round number 50% of your energy trying to keep this barrier up all the time, right? How does that impact everything else? Because now when you go home to your friends, your loved ones, your significant others, or whoever else, they're getting whatever's left of that. Now you're breaking fractions down. The other part of it is I've always discovered that you lose it the most when you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, right? When you got that HALT thing going on, HALT. And when you're in one of those modes, that's when it's going to come out at the most inopportune time. And if I lose my cool in a staff meeting or whatever else, because I've been so exhausted trying to hold up this gigantic, this gigantic barrier, this facade, I lose credibility now. Right? I lose credibility because I can't keep my cool. I can't keep my cool when it's really needed because I was spending half my energy just trying to put this fake facade up the whole time, right? And that's something that we need to be aware of. And I read this book. It's not exactly the same, but it's a book called The Power of Nunchi. It's a Korean-based book, and it was talking about how if you don't have that social awareness and social intelligence, like you kind of talk about, that also impacts your credibility. If you just walk in and start talking to somebody when they're having a conversation with somebody else, you're like. Who wants to follow the guy who doesn't even understand that was inappropriate, right? And I think there's a huge part of that as well.
That's a great point. And how often do we see stuff like that? That's a great, very practical example. Okay, so what have been some key ways, some practical ways, Joe, that you have grown your emotional health and emotional intelligence?
So I think for one thing for me is knowing, really doing some deep work and analyzing what my triggers are. And I know when I went to UPenn and we talked about iceberg beliefs, right? And when you have these iceberg beliefs, talking about those beliefs that lie really deep below the surface. And an example I'll say, and a lot of times they come up because you're grown with them, they're put into your life. An example that I would use is I remember growing up in an Asian American household, is that we respect our elders very much so, like many other cultures, right? And something that I grew up with was the elder or person with most authority gets to sit up front in a car, right? If they're not driving, they sit at the place of honor, which is the shotgun position. And I remember running to the car when I was a little kid, and then maybe my cousin would be like, shotgun, and jump into the car when there was a person that was older, and I wanted to choke them out and bring them to the back seat, right? These are just things, that feelings, right? And I say that that's just an example. We have a lot of things like that. Maybe we believe that holding the door for people and that they should say thank you, right? I mean, when you do, those are things that they shoulds, right? We're talking about the shoulds that we are all, that we're all kind of wired with, that we grow up with. And I think that first doing the deep work to find out what those are, right? Because when you understand what your beliefs are that are driving some of these emotions that might be out of place, I think that helps you understand how to control them. Now, how do you actually control them? Well, you got to do those emotional intelligent push-ups every now and then, right? And if you, in my opinion, cognitive behavioral therapy does this great, it comes from Stoic philosophy and everything else is, there's a space. Dr. Viktor Frankl said between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space, there's that choice of how you're going to respond, right? Some of us suck at that. That space is real small. We can't, but the more you practice it and turn it into a habit, the more you can expand that space. And now you have that moment where you're like, okay, everybody calm down. This isn't a big deal, or I'm not in danger right now. I feel like I am for some reason going to a fight or flight mode, but I'm not in danger. It's just triggering something else. Analyzing that and expanding that space, taking that deep pause and controlling yourself and thinking about the most productive outcome. I think that's a great tool to start with, when it comes to, you got to be aware and then you got to figure out a tool to use. And also have grace and forgive yourself when you screw it up, because it'll happen regularly, right?
Yeah, that's great. So as part of that, Joe, do you have like an SOP for my civilians out there, that's standard operating procedure? Do you have a system of questions that you ask yourself on a regular basis to help monitor your emotional health?
Yeah, you know what? And I think it's, definitely somewhat of a framework. If something's happening, and I think I go through it pretty quick now. It was when you first developing this framework, you got to kind of go through it step by step. But, why am I feeling this? Why am I feeling this way about this action? What am I attaching to whatever that person did or whatever is happening to me right now? What am I attaching to that? Right? Because things in themselves, things that happen to us, they don't get a response out of us unless we attach some feeling towards it, right? Or some belief towards it. So I think, like, what am I attaching to this? Is that actually true? Do I have 100% truth, fact, right? Do I have facts that prove that that person really meant to do that? Or whatever else, right? The circumstance. What I believe right now, can I prove it to be true? And if not, let me at least ask the question, have conversations. And if I can't, because someone cut me off on the road and I'm losing my mind, right? I can't talk to that person right now. I could communicate, but it's probably not going to be effective, right? Then I just tell myself maybe that person was in a rush. I'll tell myself something that, that will help bring me back down to baseline. And it might not be true, but you know what? That person's not going to lose sleep tonight. So why am I dwelling on it? So those are some of the things that I kind of go through and think about. And the more you do it with the small stuff, I think the more effective you can be when the big stuff hits.
Excellent, Joe. Excellent. It's, for me, I can completely relate with everything that you shared there. And I'm getting better at all that. Not that I've got that mastered, but I'm definitely getting better at that. And what's been amazing to me is the power, the emotional power of my stories, accurate or inaccurate. And the longer I allow myself to stew on my stories, man, have found myself on a number of occasions, the longer I dwell on those stories that are not accurate, the more my emotional, the more emotional I get. And so at some point I have to break that cycle, hopefully sooner the better, with some of these questions. Okay, what is my story? What's the belief attached to my story? Where did this story come from? Is my story foolproof? Is it 100% the facts of the case? Could there be other, is there another more accurate story that I'm not considering? Right. Yeah. Anyway, et cetera, et cetera. So great questions there, Joe. That was awesome.
And is a response even needed right now? Because I think sometimes we feel like there always has to be a response. And I think that has to do with our ego some too. But sometimes it's okay to lean back and say, okay, that happened. That's okay.
That's right. Move on. Yeah, that's great. What resources have been helpful for you to grow your EQ? Any books or podcasts or any resources that have really helped you with your EQ?
So, I think I like to read a lot. So, yeah, The Power of Noon Chi was good. It's not directly related to EQ, but it kind of talks about that social awareness and understanding of what's going on around you. A lot of self-awareness tools like the Values and Action Survey. You can Google it, viame.org. You can go on there and that's a self-awareness tool that helps you kind of understand what your strengths are, because I found that when you live in your strengths, it's not to say you don't want to go outside your comfort zone. We definitely need to do that. But when you can live in your strength and leverage those the most, like I said earlier, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. If you're exhausted, the more likely you're going to go off the handle on things. So if you can keep yourself at a good energy level throughout the day, I think that's very important. And you do that more when you leverage your strengths and be yourself, be authentic versus trying to be something that you're not. That's very important. All of us are susceptible to doing that. We're influenced by stuff around us, right? So I think that, and then, another tool that I would use is gratitude journaling. I think that really helps me keep things in perspective. And when I could keep things in perspective, it helps combat that negativity bias of all the bad things happening throughout the day. It makes sure that I remember that there's good things that happen too. And all those things proactively, as well as reading, Daniel Goleman's books and studies on emotional intelligence, learning. Chief Master on Air Force Joe Bass just today put out an article about emotional intelligence, which was very cool. Podcasts like yours, that really dig deep into it. I think these are all great tools. So you got to learn. And then, and I think we talked about it when you were on my podcast, you look for those people that are good examples of EQ, that they're doing it, and then go study them. What are they doing? Right. Hang out with them, because if you're studying all this stuff all day and then you're hanging out with people that lose it all the time, you're going to just fall into that same rut and maybe even turn out just like the environment that you're in. So find ways to put yourself in environments where people are able to effectively control their emotions to put them in the most productive situations, right?
Love it. That's excellent, Joe. Thanks for sharing all those ideas there. One that I'll share, one of the most powerful, again, at least at this stage of my EQ growth journey, that I have found in this area, in impacting this area, that someone can apply immediately today, is two things: validate and affirm. Validate and affirm. So everyone that you speak to, can you validate and affirm the emotion, either stated or implicit, that is conveyed on their end? And the amount of therapy and catharsis and healing that can come just from validating and affirming somebody else's, feelings and emotions. Again, whether or not you agree with them, you don't have to. I don't have to agree with your feelings or emotions. I don't have to agree with your viewpoint. But if I can just, again, and the term for that is empathy, right? It's really the term for validating and affirming, if you put that in one word. But just validate. So, man, Joe, so what if I'm hearing you correctly, if I'm understanding you correctly, man, what you're feeling is, it sounds like you're really frustrated based on kind of what's going on right now, right? Just, well, that's exactly what I'm feeling. And just like that feeling of like, how does it feel of being heard and understood? Right.
No, absolutely. It's you investing in me at that moment, right? You're investing in me. And I think that's so important. And I think because we're all people, we like to be validated and affirmed, right? I mean, that's just, I love affirmation. That's my love language. You know what I mean? And now I don't need it from everybody. I just need it from the people I care about the most. But, those are things that are very important to me. So I think it's very, that's a great point. And what I would add on to what I just kind of said earlier also is forgive. I think forgiveness is so important. And a lot of us are carrying baggage from things that we're unable to forgive people in the past for. And when we carry that baggage, once again, now you're holding up a facade that's taking up a bunch of your energy. Now you're carrying this baggage from not being able to forgive. And sometimes that's maybe you're not able to forgive yourself, right? These things that we carry limit our abilities to be effective when it comes to emotional intelligence. And in the end, it limits our potential as human beings. And we got to really be able to do that deep work and look into it and figure out what's going on inside.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I want to, encourage everybody, because, Joe, you've said this a few times, is that deep work. I want to encourage everybody that deep work, it's not easy, it's not fast, and it can feel like 3 steps forward and 2 steps backward. But I just want to encourage you to kind of jump on that point that Joe's made a few times, that the outcome and the end result is so worth doing that sometimes slow, sometimes painful, deep work. The outcome and the benefits are so huge. You will, when you do that deep work, it's so freeing emotionally. It's so liberating emotionally. And now you can run that race of life in leadership and business, whatever you're doing, with so much more, freedom and less, not being encumbered, and more effective, more efficient from a business standpoint too. So great points, Joe. So wrapping up, Joe, here. So what, any final tip or point or advice that you would share with someone wanting to grow and develop their emotional health and emotional intelligence?
I think the biggest thing that I could say is surround yourself with the right people. That's for sure, because it's really hard. And I kind of brought it up a little bit ago, but I'm not even saying surrounding yourself with only the people that are the greatest examples of EQ. I mean, that's a good one, though, if you're learning, right? But look around, and are you surrounded by people that are constantly negative? They're constantly playing the victim. If your circle is constantly living in that negative spectrum, it's going to be very difficult for you to grow as a person and as in your emotional intelligence. It's going to be very difficult. And I think you have to be willing to cut ties with certain people. And it might sound terrible for some people, but I would say that, if they're not helping you grow and you're not helping them grow, maybe you need to expand your circle a little bit. I think that's very important. On top of all the other tips, that we kind of talked about, doing that deep work and everything else, look around, take stock of your environment, take stock of your circle of influence and the people that are influencing you. We call them your board of directors that you have around you that are constantly contributing to the decisions you make in your life. Do they deserve those 6 figures? Do they deserve that position in your board of directors? Because to say that we're not influenced by the people around us would be very naive, right? So I would say that make sure you keep those healthy relationships around you and really take stock of whether or not those relationships are indeed healthy.
That's excellent, Joe. One of the biggest things that has helped me in that area is a book called Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud that has revolutionized. As a hardcore people guy and as a recovering people pleaser addict, that book has been life-changing. Again, to your point, the power of relationships, but making sure that those relationships are healthy and serving all the parties involved, and not just serving me or just serving you, but serving both of us.
Yeah. Just because you love those people or they love you doesn't mean that it's still a healthy relationship and the timing's right now. It's just something we just got to kind of understand.
Excellent point. Joe, how do people find you? How do they follow you with all the great stuff you're doing?
Oh, man. So I appreciate that opportunity. I would say if you want to find me on either LinkedIn or Facebook, you can find just search Joe Bogdan. You'll see me on there. On Facebook, you can look up the Llama Lounge. You'll see that, and a big thing that says life learning and leadership. That's what we're all about. On LinkedIn, same thing. The Llama Lounge website is www.llama-leadership.com. And you can find our podcast, the Llama Lounge, on all the podcast platforms out there, Apple Podcasts, Castbox, and all that good stuff. So we look forward to connecting with any of you. You jump on, hit like, hit me as a friend or whatever. I pretty much accept everybody. So I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate it, Noble. I am honored and grateful to be connected to such an amazing soul like you. And thank you for allowing me to come on and talk a little bit about such an important topic.
Joe, it's been awesome, bro. It's been awesome having you, man, and being another person in my life. You know, there's a verse in the basic instructions before leaving Earth, Proverbs 27:17, as iron sharpens iron, so Big Joe sharpens Big Poppy.
Man, that's awesome. Love it. Love it.
Thank you so much, Joe. Have a super day, brother.
All right, you too. Take care, bro.